Roy Harper's character arc in Young Justice's first 2 seasons can be summed up in one word: obsession. His obsession with joining the Justice League, originally founded and put into him via Cadmus and the Light, drove him to not only leaving Green Arrow as his sidekick, but also striking it out on his own at 18, wanting to become a member of the Justice League. All of this was obviously not something that he actually wanted. The obsession was planted into him so that he could be a mole, somebody to take over the Justice League and to ruin them from the inside out to benefit the Light, a big evil organization that wants to control the world from the shadows and bring the world into the light. And while this obsession was completely manufactured and fake, Roy seems to show that obsession runs deep in his veins, far outside of just Cadmus programming. Because when Roy Harper finds out that he is a clone, that he has been programmed, and that he's been nothing more than a tool, he has one thing on his mind and one thing only, and that's finding the real Roy Harper. And going forward, just for the sake of not being confused all the time, I'm gonna be calling him Will Harper, which is what he goes by in season 3 onwards. And while he isn't called that in the second season, which is what I'll be mostly covering, it just helps me differentiate and will hopefully help you differentiate as well. Now, as many of you know, there is a massive time jump between seasons 1 and 2 of Young Justice. So in order to catch up with Will Harper and see where he's at the start of the second season, we have to cover the 5-year time skip, because a lot changed for Will during those 5 years and a lot happened. But you wouldn't know any of this happened unless you not only played Young Justice's very mediocre tie-in game for the Xbox 360 and PS3, but you also had to collect each and every one of Red Arrow's diaries in those games to get caught up with Roy and what he had been doing during the time skip. And these diaries are extremely important to his development as a character and extremely important to the second season of the show. So it absolutely baffles me that, again, it was locked away in a tie-in game. Now, I won't be going over each and every one of these diaries, but more or less summarizing them and reading word for word the more important ones, but I will be putting them up on screen in case you're interested at reading them in their entirety, so feel free to pause and read them as you see them on screen. Will's first diary entry takes place on the same day as we saw the finale of season 1. He can't sleep, he is struggling with being a clone. It's something that's been on the forefront of his mind since the very beginning, and he's not taking it very well. His second diary journal is on February 1st of that same year. They are actively looking for Roy and hoping that it gets better. These diary journals also help as pieces of world building for other characters. You can see Diana talking about Aquaman's son being born. They're just little setup things that these diaries have. It makes the world building more fun, but it's just so sad it was locked behind a video game. In Diary Journal 3, which is actually a 2-part report, this takes place in March of year 1 of the team as well. He is still continuing to do sweeps of Cadmus and actually trying his best to find if there's any chance of Roy Harper being there. As we know from the end scene of the first season, the Light moved Roy Harper out, which means Will is not going to find anyone at Cadmus. And by this point being March, most of the league has kind of given up, at least based on these journal entries. And we see another skip ahead to November 1st of year 1 of the team as well, in which we get to see people like Blue Beetle join the team, but again, we're still getting nothing from Roy. He's still questioning himself as to whether or not Will Harper is a real person, or if he still has Cadmus programming inside of him. The next diary journal entry picks up in year 2 of the team in October. He is infiltrating Lex Luthor's robotics plant and is actively trying to continue to look, along with another clone of Roy Harper, that being the original Guardian. You may remember him from the pilot and for mostly getting mind controlled for a lot of the first season. But ultimately, with nothing to be found in October, and we're getting close to being a year after finding out that Will is a clone, most people are giving up, but he refuses to. In December, he continues to track every single step that Lex Luthor is making, going to different organizations Luthor has, but in the process, he ends up running into Cheshire, and he ultimately sees Cheshire as a way in to hopefully get close to the League of Shadows, who work very closely with the Light. And in Journal 5, we see that come to fruition. November of Team Year 3, so it's been an entire year since his last journal update. He has pretty much joined the League of Shadows, but using Cheshire as a front to get in. Him and Jade actually begin to grow pretty close as Journal 6 opens up. He sees there's a lot behind Jade that most people don't find, especially during Team Year 4. And it even gets to the point where Cheshire was willing to blow her cover with the League of Assassins, drop her fake psychopathic mask, all to help take care of Will. They share a very like Spider-Man, Black Cat, Batman, Catwoman dynamic where it's never going to really work out no matter how much you might want it to or Will might want it to, just because of the opposite natures of the character, but for right now, they're very aligned. In journal number 7, he's still hot on the trail, but it's just been coming up empty, completely empty. And by journal number 8, Roy and Jade are still looking but haven't found anything. Again, we're well into year 4 of the team existing, closing in on year 5. And we even get to see a little bit of his own self-loathing. When he looks at Superboy, he sees a successful clone, somebody that lives up to the moniker of Superman, where he doesn't live up to the moniker of Roy Harper at all. He feels that he is nothing and worthless in comparison. And by journal number 9, it's over. Him and Jade have been getting into a lot of fights, and Jade is even starting to lose faith at this point, which is kind of crazy because the two are married. Yes, during the time between the first 2 seasons, him and Jade got married during the search for the real Roy Harper. It, again, is like a Catwoman Batman thing. It's kind of sad, honestly. But finally, by journal number 10, Jade took off, and he's got nothing. No leads, no trail, absolutely nothing. He is alone. He's exhausted every single resource. All of his money, all of his time, all of his energy. He hasn't been training. He hasn't been keeping up with his body intake. And he is, for all intents and purposes, catchphrase, broken. And when we find him in the 2nd season, his appearance reflects that. He is skinnier, he's gaunt, he has a shaggy haircut, a really terrible 5 o'clock shadow, and he's overall looking rough. And it's clear he's been having to do a lot of odd things to survive. For reference, he's actively stealing money from a person he just helped recover their money because he needs it. He isn't doing well in the slightest. The things that he was able to do previously as Red Arrow, he physically can't do. He's at the end of his rope, and because this was a kid's show, they don't really outright state that he was using, but just by looking at him in the way in which he was acting and the way in which Jade left, it can very much be implied that he was using, especially with the show getting a more mature rating for seasons 3 and onward. Will was clearly struggling, and everybody could tell. The obsession was eating at him. He has spent 5 years on the run actively trying to find the original Roy Harper, and it hasn't worked. And his community is trying to rally behind him, some with soft love and some with tough love. But Will wasn't hearing any of it.
No. My body's no temple. It's a cheap knockoff. A clone.
Roy is just completely full of self-hate and self-loathing, believing he stepped in and took the place of what should be the original Roy Harper. And so in this situation, Will is miserable. But at the same time, we see Jim, aka Guardian. Jim Harper was once and previously also a clone, but he has moved on. He has made a life for himself outside of being a clone. and in doing so, he had to give up and put away the Guardian persona. He had to become his own person outside of what Cadmus made him, much like Superboy. But ultimately, Roy doesn't want to hear any of that, even when his friends are trying to tell him that they were never friends with the original Roy Harper. They were always friends with Will, because that's the guy they fought alongside.
We've all done the math. Speedy was abducted before any of us met.
You're the guy we trained beside, fought beside. You're the only you we know.
But as I've said many a time on this channel, you can't help somebody that isn't ready to help themselves. And unfortunately, Will just ain't ready to help himself yet. He isn't ready to give up on Speedy, and while that is admirable, he's also not taking care of himself and doing right by the people he needs to do right by in his life. And importantly, that includes Cheshire. Now, Cheshire comes back with something crucial. She knows where Roy Harper is, the real one, but it's going to come at a cost. And that's for Will to get his shit together, because they got a daughter, man.
Roy, I left because your obsession with finding Speedy was all-consuming. There wasn't room in your life for anything else or anyone. Not me, and not our daughter.
We have a daughter?
And this is what it took for Will to get himself together. Not only being able to finally have a reason outside of finding the original Roy Harper to live, but also in finding the person he's been searching for all this time. This is, for all intents and purposes, a toxic relationship dynamic, and Cheshire ain't exactly baby mama material, although these guys are married, so technically wife material. But it's clear that she does care for the kid, and Roy sees a lot of what Artemis has in her. He sees that Cheshire isn't a terrible person, and so he is more than willing to try and get his life back on track and get it together, if it means not only being in his daughter's life, but potentially having Jade back with him. And as well, getting to wrap up finding Roy solves a lot of the problems he's been dealing with, because again, a lot of this conflict, a lot of this obsession runs rooted in the idea that he has to find the man whose life that he stole. It is again a very admirable goal, but one he has given everything to, and thankfully he doesn't have to anymore, because ultimately he does find Roy, despite people saying that he is dead, despite Jim mentioning specifically that Cadmus gets rid of the original DNA samples. Roy was kept on ice in case he was useful. And ultimately, the light keeping him was a pretty big mistake on their end. For once, they weren't playing pseudo mind games, they just actually messed up. And ultimately, Will gets to finally move on from the number one thing that has been bugging him for the last 5 years. And by bugging, I mean weighing down heavily, because he's been unable to do anything else. And it is from this point forward that we thankfully get to see Will really get his life on track and put himself back together. And to give credit where credit's due, Cheshire was heavily involved with that. Not only was she standing beside Roy for a majority of like the 2 years he was on the hunt, she also was the one that ultimately found the original Roy, and thankfully was there to bring him back to a sense of normalcy. And while I won't stand here and go to bat for Cheshire because she's obviously a bad person, it is credit where credit's due in this scenario. And clearly Will sees something in her that most people didn't, because unfortunately a lot of Cheshire's character development gets to take place off screen, which bugs me to no end, because just why? I love the time skip and all. I personally like it. I like the idea of time moving forward in my stories, but if you're going to give me such a drastic character change, I would like to be given a decent set of reasons on screen as to why. So now that Will has accomplished his main goal, he's kind of all free, but there's one thing he wants to do, and that's to help explain everything to the freshly woken up Roy Harper, the one that is missing an arm and that is still perpetually like 17 years old and has the angst to show it. When we meet this version of Roy, he is like somehow far angrier and more brooding than Will, and Will was already those things, but it is very, very clear that they're distinctly different people. And unfortunately, as much as Will tries to be there and comfort along with Green Arrow, it's not working out too well. Understandably, Roy is angry. Somebody else has been living his life for over half a decade, close to like 8 years at this point. It's horrific, but ultimately he has the empathy and the wherewithal to understand it's not the clone's fault, but rather he's extremely pissed at Green Arrow because GA thought that he was doing detective work. He thought that he found the real Roy Harper, but ultimately all he did was find a clone. And this has led to what would be Green Arrow's third failed prodigy. He failed Red Arrow, he failed Artemis because Artemis is dead at this point and everybody thinks that she is, and he failed Will. It's extremely hard to take on, and Roy doesn't make it any easier on him.
I don't know. Seems to me the clone didn't do anything wrong. He didn't ask to be created. Plus, he found me. I can't blame him for this. But I can totally blame you!
Roy,
We were partners. Friends. How could you not know I've been replaced? How could you leave me in Luther's hands for 8 years?
But if there was one truly good thing to come out of this, it's that Roy, specifically Will, my bad, is finally able to let go of his obsession. Will is finally free, and in doing so, he is finally able to reconcile not only with being a clone, but reconcile with his past and reconcile with Green Arrow, to admit that GA was a good mentor and a good man, to admit to himself that he can finally move on. It is a beautiful sequence, and something that I think was a really great way to end Will Harper's development for this second season.
Curse, isn't it? Having me for a mentor. Speedy, Red Arrow, and Artemis. The three of you all poster children for the Stay Away from Green Arrow Club.
I may not have always shown it over the years, but I don't feel that way.
In the end, we get a calmer, more level-headed, and just far more well-rounded human being in Will Harper. It's a great way to leave him off in season 2, but that may leave you questioning, Venny, why is there still so much time left in this video? Well, the video does say Roy Harper, right? And technically, we just found a OG. So that means it's time to dig into Roy Harper and his obsession. This being Roy Prime, or the not clone version, because the obsession seems to run in the DNA of Roy Harper as a character, because this version of Roy is completely obsessed with revenge. Because the first thing that was on Roy's mind the second that he had woke up and had everything explained to him was to immediately go to one of the few safe houses that Green Arrow kept around, because he's quite the pack rat, and to take his old equipment and use it to hunt down and kill Lex Luthor. He only had that on his mind. That is all he wanted to do, but he chose to do it in a very different way. Roy doesn't have his arm anymore, which means using his bow is completely out of the question. So now he goes for something a little more explosive. Now mind you, how this man thought he was going to use an RPG with one arm and managed to is far beyond my comprehension. But hey, he's just got it like that. He has completely given up the persona of being Speedy and has rather chose to set out on his own mission that is, well, more detrimental to his health than usual. I can't say the word because YouTube really doesn't like it. Either way, he pulls a red hood on Lex Luthor and literally tries to blow this man up. Shout out New Jersey in 2012. Ultimately though, this obsession quite literally nearly ended up with Roy being dead again, because everybody thought he was dead for like the 8 years he was gone, because he can't let go of this obsession with Lex Luthor. Matter of fact, dude was quite willing to put himself into severe danger and almost completely get himself killed in order to kill Lex Luthor. I mean, at least he's got, you know, willpower. What I will say is though, like, the rope that you can wrap around and explodes is extraordinarily cool. I thought it was awesome. Either way, Roy ultimately doesn't end up killing Lex Luthor, and rather takes something that will help him forever protect his true #1 obsession, and that is never going on ice again. Roy never wants to be captured. He never wants to be taken away from whatever life he is going to build after this. He wants to grasp hold of it and never let it go. So for today, Lex Luthor gets to live, and Roy gets a way of protecting himself no matter where he's at. It's an arm much like Mercy's, in which it's a weapon. It might not look like a person's arm, but ultimately it's going to keep him safe going forward and forever. Although, I don't know if I'd ever trust a piece of technology that Lex Luthor handed to me, because there's always a catch. Just look at what happened to Superboy. But for right now, Roy seems to be pretty happy with it, and it is a pretty cool looking arm.
And it'll literally make me a living weapon. No one's putting me on ice again, ever.
And with this decision, he ultimately chooses to no longer be Speedy. Once again, another version of Roy Harper decides to reinvent themselves, this time as Arsenal. I think it's a really cool idea to have not only Arsenal but Red Arrow be two separate characters, because in pre-52 continuity, Red Arrow was a thing, and then in New 52, we had Arsenal. It was like, it's a pretty cool thing to see them separate them into separate characters. I really enjoy that, especially because this version of Roy Harper truly embodies that anger that Arsenal holds as a character. So that is pretty awesome. And we see this anger on display in the very next episode that he is a prominent mainstay. Roy ends up joining the team. And while Will was always hot-headed, Roy takes it up to another level, because I can only imagine the kind of trauma he probably experienced during all of that time on ice. And his hot-headedness is very much displayed in his first interaction with Nightwing, involving using the Watchtower.
You don't qualify.
Good to know where we stand.
Now, on this first mission, it was supposed to just be a covert ops mission like usual. That's mostly what the team is used for. And they're investigating Lex Luthor, the food that he's making, and his work with the Reach, as the Reach are putting special chemicals in the food to produce them faster and to also make them healthier and taste better. It's all a ploy by the Reach to unlock the metahuman gene and do their whole take over the world thing and sell metahumans for money. But unfortunately, this covert ops mission doesn't last very long, because Arsenal doesn't care if it's covert ops or not. He only cares about one thing, and that's getting back at Lex Luthor. This is once again his obsession seeping into himself and causing problems for other people. This obsession that Roy holds is ultimately going to end up really screwing over the team.
Through the lab? But this was a covert op! What were you thinking?
That I'm not about to let Lex Luthor and his alien space buddies poison the world just because we don't know exactly what poison they're using.
Because Roy chose his own personal selfish gain over the protection of the team, he ultimately ends up getting Black Beetle called on them, and Black Beetle was a menace throughout the show. I know I haven't really talked about him because he hasn't been relevant, but Black Beetle is like Blue Beetle on steroids, and this man is not to be played with. He is almost completely invulnerable, and one of the only things that could get to him was later revealed to be the Green Martian, who is also a scarab user, but again, not too prevalent for this video. What's really important is Arsenal is the reason he shows up and is the reason the mission went awry. He almost gets all of his team members killed because he is so hot-headed, because he is so obsessed, and because he only thinks about himself. He has the same self-destructive tendencies that we just saw with Will Harper. The only difference is he has no care or no reason to get rid of them. And unfortunately, because everything worked out, his team was willing to cover for him.
How'd the mission go?
Not quite as planned. Arsenal is a little rough around the edges, but I guess it all worked out.
But what happens when it doesn't work out? What happens when Arsenal, being reckless all for the sake of his own obsession with not getting caught, his own obsessions and vendettas against villains, ultimately lead to putting his team in severe danger and almost getting them all killed? We see that in an episode, well, 2 episodes, mostly taking place on War World, which is Mongol's whole little world where he's trying to like blow up the earth because the Justice League did some really bad stuff under control of Vandal Savage. And while the Justice League is attacking the War World and keeping it busy, Nightwing sends the Covert Ops team, which is a majority of what's left of the team at this point, including Arsenal, onto War World in the hopes that they can take it down from the inside out. And after a few setbacks, ultimately they are able to take down the War World and, thankfully, get the power source in which they're going to use to completely shut it down. But unfortunately, it goes completely wrong due to the fact that Blue Beetle, because he's under the mind control of the Scarab and the Reach, ends up betraying the team, and in doing so, he was going to lock them all up. And unfortunately, Arsenal wasn't going to play that in the slightest. Quite literally, as he was just gaining the trust of the team, he does something born of his obsession.
No. Not again.
Arsenal, no!
I will not be taken again.
Because of his obsession and because of his fear, Arsenal was more than willing to put his own teammates in even graver danger than he did before. The first time you could write it off as it all worked out well, and thankfully nobody was hurt. But in this situation, he straight up sacrificed his team so that he wouldn't be put back on ice because he's afraid. Because he is obsessed with the idea of never being as vulnerable as he once was. He does not put any faith in his own strength or his team's strength, but rather takes the fastest way out, which results in his team being kidnapped and captured, and him running around War World for days on end, trying to get power and hopefully find a way to save his team. And to some extent, I get it. We all have our own obsessions, and I can see why he did the things that he did. I can empathize with why, but I can't approve of the actions he took, endangering more people than just himself. It is one thing when your obsession pushes you further and further and you're damaging yourself like Will Harper was, but it is an entirely different thing when your obsession and your pushing harms other people. That's where the line is drawn, at least for me personally. I am obsessed with this channel. I sold my entire senior year of high school to build this YouTube channel. I wasn't hanging out with my friends. I wasn't taking care of my little brother. I wasn't doing family things. I spent every single ounce of my being here for you guys. And while I don't regret it, I do recognize that it was self-destructive, because I gave myself no time to rest. I gave myself no time to have a life outside of this job. And it's that recognition that Roy seems to lack, especially currently, because even when the team was rescued and the job was finished, he could not accept that what he did was wrong.
Hey! After 8 years on ice, there's no way I was getting grabbed again. And in case you hadn't noticed, my escape resulted in you being free now to stand here and complain. So how about a thank you?
And ultimately, this led to him being kicked off the team permanently. And this was it for Roy. This is the second time he's done this thing, and he had no one to bail him out this time. And while Static Shock and his group seemingly want to take Roy in for saving the day for them, unfortunately, he's off the team, and eventually he's not even with Static Shock's group anymore, as they would go on to split up or, in Static's case, join the actual team. Unfortunately, Roy goes his own separate way and is, for all intents and catchphrases, alone. That's it for him and for this season. His obsession led to his own self-destruction on the team and self-destruction through the series. While this may not be as bad as Will Harper, he is completely alone and isolated. It is almost as though he is still in the ice to a lot of the other members of the team, and as well, the rest of this show. And while we got to see the healing of Will Harper, we got to see him at his lowest point, but also rise to a far healthier point for his daughter, we also have to recognize that Arsenal has fallen extremely far. He is fallen into that same obsession that destroyed Will earlier in the season, and it's a vicious cycle. Now, we do see him at the end of the show when the world needs just about every superhero that's available and all of their hands on deck to save the day. But in the final episode, when we see what the team looks like, Arsenal is completely missing, and obviously so is Will's Red Arrow. Because again, Red Arrow is retiring, he's taking care of his kid, and Arsenal doesn't have a place on the team because he's not a team player. And unfortunately, Obsession destroyed Roy Harper. It destroyed Roy Harper the clone and led to the birth of Will Harper, a new identity free, and Roy Harper's obsession destroyed him after being found out of the ice. Alright, time to do the whole YouTuber thing. Thank you all so much for watching. If you want to like, it helps out the channel a lot. If you want to leave a dislike, that's cool too. Just leave me a comment down below telling me why you disliked the video. Constructive criticism helps me to be a better creator for all of you. If you want to sub, it's free. You can always unsubscribe later. As well, I run a Patreon for $1 a month. You can see all these videos early, unedited, which means all of the copyright avoidance I have to do on YouTube isn't on the Patreon version. And finally, if you're in the $5 or above tier, I shout your name out at the end of each and every one of these videos. So shout out Demetrius Youngblood, shout out West Belladonna, shout out Oscar, shout out McGann, shout out eSibert13, shout out Gabriel Lafonte, Transgers1, Video Gamer 75, Golden Boy 420, Dakota Rawson, Donovan Gomez, and MC Bomb 27. And hope you all have an absolutely fantastic day.